that is Academic Excellence Day 2021. I'm glad to see you at least on a Zoom call, and so glad that you are here to hear from Nick today. Nick T, affectionately known in our circle of trust, right? To talk about his honors thesis project. I have to tell you, I'm Shelley Lemons. I am a professor of history here at McKendree. And the first time that Nick came to me and said he wanted to do this project, my first thought was, why is someone from outside of the circles of history interested in doing this? But we have had such a good time over the last year working together. And I have learned a lot about military weapons and the Cold War. I thought I knew a lot about the Cold War, but I've learned a lot, and you'll learn more today too. Nick has some slides prepared for you for his project entitled The Cold Steel of the Cold War. We'll have the chat feature available during his presentation today as well. You can put your questions there as you go, and then we'll have him answer those when we get to the end, or at the end of his presentation, we'll also have a chance to open the floor to open your mics and ask as well. But without further ado, Nick, I'll turn the floor over to you to tell us about your project.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Just want to make sure before my mic isn't muted that I go start off on some tangent. Okay, so morning everyone, thanks for coming. Like Dr. Lemons said, I'm presenting on the different firearms of the Cold War, and without further ado, we'll begin. Maybe, there we go. So our story begins with one Mikhail Kalashnikov. Here's a picture of him at his later age. Since he was born in the Soviet Union, there's not really many early pictures of him, sadly. He was born in 1919, the 8th child of Timofey Alexandrovich Kalashnikov and Alexandra Frelovina Kalashnikov. He was often sick as a child, but he worked hard on the family farm beginning at age 7 already. He had a very rough life because that's how it was in Russia as the peasants. And then in 1929, the Communist Party representatives showed up to town. They began dividing the town into 3 groups: the poor, the middling, and well-off peasants. And then in 30, the Kalashnikov family was considered a group of well-off peasants and shipped off to Nizhny Mokovava in Siberia, one of the Siberian work farms. So what the Raps would do is they'd take the well-off peasants and they'd kill their cattle and burn their crops because they figured, oh, they don't need them because they're gonna just go to work in Siberia. And Kalashnikov himself had a kind of quote on this. What their definition of, he said, the rich generally had big families, so they had to raise more livestock to feed said families. But how could you judge? But not all of his family was shipped off. One of his older sisters had already married the leader of the local atheist organization, so she was safe. Another brother was already married, but he ran and hid, so he wouldn't. But he was sold out by a neighbor, and he was stuck in 7 years of work camp in another area of Siberia. And then another of his sisters had already married into another peasant family, so she was safe too. So it was a mother and 5 boys. But that wasn't the only tragedy that happened. In 1930, his dad also died towards the end of the year once they were in Siberia. So in 1936, Mikhail and his buddy, they forged travel passports and began traveling throughout the Soviet Union. They decided they wanted to see the world that they could. So they continued traveling. And then this is where Mikhail's love of firearms began. When they reached Gavril's hometown, Gavril gave Mikhail his pistol that he had hidden away. So with this pistol, Mikhail taught himself to field strip and clean the pistol, learning all the ins and the outs of it. And so when he was caught with owning a personal firearm, which is illegal in the Soviet Union, he was jailed for a day, but the local militia let him go due to a holiday happening, and they gave him strict orders to turn it in the day after. But instead of turning it in, he took it apart and scattered the pieces in a nearby forest in hopes that no one else could use it. They then traveled to Kazakhstan, where Gavril's brother got both of them jobs at the railway. but the local communist youth organization recruited him for because he had neat handwriting, so he was now a secretary for the youth organization. And then, once again, tragedy struck. 1938, he was conscripted into the Soviet Union, into a company that trained tankers and mechanics, which could be a twist of fate. Here is a T-34 picture. This is the tank this is one of the kinds of tanks he would have been assigned to. He would be sitting in there with several other people in a cramped position. And then in 1940, General Zhukov took command of Kalashnikov's group. Zhukov is probably the most famous Soviet general of World War II. And in order to keep the troops being creative, he'd give them like little technical research puzzles to keep them being creative. And through these technical puzzles, Kalashnikov actually submitted 2 prototypes. One would count the number of rounds fired through the barrel of a tank, its cannon, to see how many more rounds it had in it before it was considered worn out and the rifling was no longer good. And the other was to see how efficiently the engine of the tank would be running. These 2 designs earned him a trip to Moscow, and Zhukov himself ordered military trials for these 2 new prototypes. But 1941, Hitler attacked the Soviet Union, sending him back to his regiment instead of continuing to help with tank research. And during one engagement in these battles, he opened the tank hatch to see what was happening and took a shell burst of shrapnel to his chest, landing him in a hospital. So in this hospital, he learned about all his comrades' problems with their service weapons. They had several weapons at this point in the Soviet Union. They didn't really have, well, they did have a standard, but the M91 Mosin Nagant, which this rifle picture right here, it was a bolt-action rifle and was in use since before World War I. It was considered by many to be outdated. They also had a submachine gun, the PPSH-41. It was a very well-made submachine gun, but there was only 1 trooper who was given it per squad, and they had problems with automatic fire. So Kalashnikov took these problems and began designing a new weapon with the hopes that it'd fix them. During his time in the hospital, he learned a lot about automatic weapons from an injured paratrooper that he had a bed next to, and they also had several books written by, honestly, one of the first designers of a major automatic rifle, Antonov Fedorov. Several books written by him he was able to read in this hospital, learn more about new automatic weapons. So he was discharged from the hospital, but he was unable to go to the front lines because he still had lingering injuries, so they sent him home. Instead of going home, he went to a railway station and got space to continue working on this project. And in this space, he gathered a team of volunteer workers to help develop a prototype. And the station manager actually gave them an old Mosin rifle to help work on the prototype. They then took the prototype to Moscow, where the government entered it into their military trials, but it failed the trials, sadly. Kalashnikov would continue designing weapons, though. 45, they called out for automatic rifle designs. And he really had the opportunity of a lifetime here. He was given an assistant, and the assistant's name was Katya Moisevera, who he fell in love with and eventually married. So he does get a happy ending. And he has a good quote about it. In the end, the AK was the first true fruit of our love. His design, he had a lot of influences from a lot of different other weapons. He had a lot of M1 Garands sent over from the Line Lease program, picture right here, and captured German Sturmgewehr 44s or STG 44s, along with several other service firearms. As you can see, this STG, this Sturmgewehr, is considered the first automatic rifle. Literally translated from German, it means storm rifle, but it also roughly translates to assault rifle. So this is where we get the term assault rifle from today. But ironically, most of the influence wasn't from the STG, but rather the M1 Garand. And you can really see with the gas tube under the barrel, the AK pretty much took the M1's gas system and flipped it 180 degrees. And that's pretty much how the AK runs right now. And next up, we have the other designer, Mr. Eugene Stoner. We don't have much information on his life because he was very private, and unlike Kalashnikov, he never wrote an autobiography, or no one really ever wrote a biography about him, so there's not much information on him. What we do know is he never had a formal college degree. He began his work as an engineer with a small aircraft company. He did aircraft prototypes. And then he began working under the head designer after a co-worker found out about his designs. And then he joined the Marine Corps, where he spent his time working on machine guns. After a stint in the Marine Corps, Eugene Stoner went to work for the Armalite Division for the Fairchild aircraft. There's their insignia. And at age 35, he developed this direct impingement gas system for use in future weapons prototypes, and it was a very effective thing. He also emphasized the use of new materials like aluminum and fiberglass and other lightweight polymers for his designs. And here's a very big quote about it. He said, "One thing's for sure, even though a lot of people try it, you can't change laws of physics very much. And so therefore, the only things really left to change are the new materials that come along." And then he introduced his first new prototype, an AR-10. He entered it into a couple service trials, but never really got anywhere. It was a light rifle. You can see it was chambered in a .308 Winchester caliber, like the M14 of current American service at the time. Saw light use. Guatemala and Burma were big ones, along with Italy, Cuba, Sudan, and Portugal, but no real major success. So the background, and then the AK. In '46, his first prototype passed several trials. It was sent off for a limited production run, and here's the early prototype. But only 3 prototypes survived this round of testing, including his. They improved on their weapons. And then Kalashnikov's rifle actually won. But due to the receiver being milled instead of stamped, it was still considered unfit for mass production. So once again, he revised it in the '47. It still had the milled receiver, but it was but the government felt it could be made much more efficiently. So then in 1951, he revised it even more and gave it a stamped receiver, and it made it much more efficient for mass production. And the Soviet Union officially adopted it in 1951, the AKM, roughly translating to the automatic Kalashnikov modern variant. The M16's background, that was a bit more rough, involved a lot of government bureaucracy. In '57, the US military wanted a new light rate rifle to replace their M14. They wanted it to be able to penetrate a steel helmet at roughly 500 yards, and they wanted it to be a .22 caliber or less. So what Stoner did, he took his AR-10 platform and modified it to shoot so there's AR-10 pictured here on the left and his prototype AR-15 on the right. He took this platform and worked in tandem with Remington Firearms Manufacturing from they took a modified .222 varmint cartridge that was used for civilian purposes, and they gave it a beefier case and a stronger powder with a slightly heavier bullet, and that became the .223 round that would later be adopted. So the rifle, the first prototype made it to the military trials, but the trials were heavily skewed towards the current service M14, so they didn't really want to adopt the new one. So Armalite sold all rights, designs, and prototypes to Colt, hoping that they could give the rifle a better life because they had a lot more connections. They immediately took it and launched a new marketing campaign, advertising it as a rifle with a space-age design and self-cleaning, which it was not. That would lead to problems later, but we'll get to that in a bit. But in 1960, the efforts finally paid off with the help of a couple watermelons. So what happened was, during a 4th of July party, the president of the Fairchild Corporation invited Air Force Chief of Staff Curtis LeMay to try shooting this new prototype at some watermelons. LeMay loved the rifle so much that after shooting 2, he made sure to save the 3rd one so he could demonstrate in front of the party. And then in '62, the DoD bought 1,000 rifles and sent them to Vietnam for testing. Also, LeMay had the Air Force order 8,500 rifles for the Air Force. So with adoption, 1951, the AKM was officially adopted, and then they also adopted another design, the RPK, which was essentially an AKM with a heavier barrel as their squad automatic weapon, so like a lighter machine gun. And then for the M16, there were 2 variants, the XM16E1 and the M16. They ordered the XM16E1, which had a differently placed charging handle than what was previously had. And it also had a forward assist, which if the round did not fully chamber, it would make sure the round was chambered. And of those 104,000 rifles, 85,000 were for the Army and 19,000 were for the Air Force. So these 2 designers had several similarities. Both of them never had a formal college education. Neither of them was originally a gunsmith. Both had military experience, and both of these men never ever gave up on their weapons to switch to something new. They continued to improve their weapons along with working on new designs. But in 1990, before either of the 2 passed away, the Smithsonian actually managed to get these 2 designers together for a series of interviews. And here's a picture of them at the time holding each other's rifles. But contrary to what you'd think, they didn't greet each other as rivals, but rather old friends, which kind of gives to the brotherhood that gun design actually has with these men and how it can cross barriers, even though these 2 rifles have been opposed for as long as they have been around. So here are some of the technical specifications. AKM, it's a 7.62 by 39 millimeter Soviet cartridge. It utilizes a long stroke gas piston recoil system. So it's a lot easier. It's a lot cleaner than the direct impingement system used by the M16, but that's primarily the main reason why this gun is so easy to clean and take care of. It's a shorter overall length than the M16. It is also much heavier due to its use of steel. Pictured here is the AKM with a 30-round banana mag. It also could use 40-round banana mags or 75-round drum mags. It could fire 600 rounds RPMs rate of fire, which was a very effective rate of fire. It was a slower rate of fire than the M16, but that was more helpful for controlling the recoil because it was a heavier cartridge. The primary components of this was stamped sheet metal for the metal parts and wooden furniture. It was all plywood. The M16 specifications, on the other hand, originally was chambered in 223 Remington, which was classified as the M193 by the U.S. Army, but it later switched to the 5.56 by 45 NATO round, which was essentially the same round with a slightly thicker cartridge case and a slightly heavier bullet design by the Belgians, labeled the SS-109. 55 grain with the 223 Remington to a 62 grain with the 5.56. It used direct gas impingement, which was a very effective action. However, it was pretty dirty. It was a slightly longer rifle than the AK. However, it was much lighter weight due to its heavy use of polymers and aluminum. And it could use 20 or 30 round mag standard issue with a slightly higher rate of fire, 650 to 750 compared to the AK 600. But yes, the heavy aligned use of aluminum was big for that gun. So in the 1950s, the Soviet Union began licensing the AK and AKM production rights to other communist countries, including China, who produced their own copies of them and in turn shipped them out to North Vietnam, where efforts were kind of heating up between the North and the South. These variants were known as the Type 56, the Chinese ones. The major differences, here's pictured as a Type 56 here. The major differences, if you can see that front sight there, it had a hood over the front sight compared to the open front sights of the AK, along with the bayonet right there. It had the SKS bayonet, whereas other AKs didn't actually have a bayonet. Well, they had a bayonet lug, but they didn't have it attached. Oh, oops, sorry about that. There we go. So a famous YouTuber, he basically takes apart these weapons and explains how they work. He had a very fascinating comment about this rifle. So in the hands of the North Vietnamese, the AK was a fantastically well-suited rifle. This was a gun that was very simple to operate, very durable, and required basically no maintenance. Didn't really have to care about the rifle. You put ammo in it, you pull the trigger, and it'll fire. When you're out of ammo, you can just put it away until you have more ammo and shoot some more. So that is, in the jungles of Vietnam, that was pretty much a godsend to the Viet Cong because they were constantly on the move. They constantly had dirty weapons and stuff. So it turned out very well for them. It was very successful in its first trial. M16, on the other hand, nothing but problems at the beginning. So with the self-cleaning advertisement, that was the first major problem. There's lots of gunpowder that would foul. The gunpowder hadn't been tested, so it would foul up the weapon too much and increase the rate of fire and increase the amount of cook-offs and stuff. They weren't issued with cleaning kits or manuals due to being advertised as self-cleaning. And the Viet Cong would remove casualties from battlefields, leading to some soldiers believe that they couldn't kill with their M16s. So the soldiers came up with some nicknames, including the Mattel 16 and the Poodle Shooter, were some of the two biggest popular ones. The Mattel 16 was due to it feeling like a toy, but due to its lightweight, the Poodle Shooter because they thought it couldn't kill. But thanks to Congress sending out an investigation, all the problems were found out and the fixes were rolled out. Cleaning and maintenance were added to training. New production rifles were given chromium-lined barrels to reduce fouling and rust and the humidity, and issue rifles could be fixed. Cleaning kits were fitted into the stock. And most importantly, the gunpowder problem was fixed with the ammo and new was issued, so it was a lot easier to clean. And thanks to Dr. Lemons here for this photograph. Almost done. So aesthetics-wise, if you look, the AKM follows an old-school steel and wood design inspired by several combat rifles from World War II. And in media, it's often portrayed as the weapon of choice for the bad guys. But funnily enough, from an American perspective, we've always been fighting the M16, so it's very understandable why they portray it that way. Fun fact, Saddam Hussein was a major collector of AKs. He was often pictured with golden ones, but those weren't the ones he was interested in collecting. Those were just to show off for the cameras. But he was interested in collecting several rare, more rare production level of Soviet rifles, like the Polish Tantals. Romanians had special foregrips on them. Yugoslavian variants were a class on their own. The M16, he had a sleek space-age design and inspired a wave of other modern rifles, including the G36, FAMAS. Basically, any modern combat rifle is pretty much inspired by the M16. It's often portrayed as a good guy gun in the media, but it also finds the way in the hands of bad guys. Both are often used in war movies and video games. Special use of the ACAM in movies like Red Dawn. That was a big first impression of the AK. Here are some modern descendants of the AK. The 74U, which was AK chambered in around closer to the 5.56. The 105 is a more modern 74 and 74U with polymer furniture, more following the M16. The AK-12 is a more modern version of that. RPK is a squad automatic weapon. The PP-19 Bison took the AK's gas system and turned it into a submachine gun and a pistol caliber. So it had a 60-round helical drum mag, which was the biggest interesting thing about that. The Dragnom and SVD was a sniper variant. The AS-Val is an integrally suppressed submachine gun. VZ-58 Czechoslovakian AK, and 94 experimental gas system, Israeli Galil pictured here. And then here's some M16, just The Car 15 was the carbine variant, and then just different improvements on the design with better handguards and rail. The M27 IR is their version of the RPK. Sorry, I didn't exactly think I'd take this long. I got a bit windy. But here's the pros and cons of each one. AK is easy, it's rugged, durable, it's got more stopping power, and anywhere outside of the Americas, it's pretty much going to be used more than the M16. But it's very heavy, and it's got rougher recoil, and it's a lot harder for mounting like optics and accessories. Pros of the M16, it's lightweight, it's easy to control recoil, and it's very modular. The cons was that it needs more maintenance, and it's got a lot more small working parts to it. Oh, apologize about that. Conclusion. So between the M16 and the AK, I got to give it to the M16 just because its lightweight design is important for the soldiers of that time, even though it did have problems. With the military, ounces make pounds and pounds make pains, so you want to make sure that your soldiers are either because the M16 and its ammo is lighter, they could either carry more ammo than the AK, traditional soldier carrying the AK, or they could have a lot less weight on them. And then between the two modern ones, I still have to give it to the M16, even if just slightly, because this thing is modular as heck. And for a modern combat situation, the modularity is great, because if you want to, say if you want one soldier in your platoon to be a marksman, you can just pull two pins out, switch the barrel, and you're good to go with a longer barrel for longer range engagements. Or you can give it a shorter barrel for closer range engagements, and you can you can rechamber it in multiple calibers. The AKM, you basically have to hand in your gun, get a new gun to get a different caliber in your rifle. So that's pretty much it. I just want to give special thanks to Dr. Lemons for all the help and words of encouragement. Couple of these two YouTubers basically gave me the inspiration. If you're interested in more firearms history, I'd highly recommend Ian McCollum on Forgotten Weapons. You won't be disappointed. Thanks to the friends and family, and then for all of you coming here and listening.